I'm so glad you could make it.
I'm so glad you don't like Iraq.
Me too. It's been too long.
The first time I noticed her wasn't supposed to mean anything. It was just a Tuesday evening, laundry tumbling in the machines at the corner laundromat, the kind of place that smelled faintly of detergent and wet metal. I sat on one of the plastic chairs, half reading the same page of a book I'd carried around for weeks. That's when she walked in. I knew her already, of course. Mrs. Hanley, my best friend Daniel's mom. Mid-40s, always polite, always carrying herself with a quiet self-assurance. But in that fluorescent-lit room, with her sleeves rolled up and her hair tied loosely at the back of her neck, she looked not like Daniel's mom, not like Mrs. Hanley, just like a woman. "Didn't think anyone under 30 still came here," she said, loading her basket into a machine beside mine. I smiled, awkwardly. "Didn't think anyone over 30 did either." She laughed softly, the sound cutting through the hum of the dryers. That was the first small shift. The conversation didn't last long. Just a few comments about the machines always eating socks, the price of detergent creeping up. Nothing worth remembering. But when I glanced at her, she was already looking at me. She didn't look away quickly, the way most people do when caught. She held it, just long enough to make me feel like I'd said something more important than I had. I folded the corner of my page and shut the book, even though I hadn't been reading it anyway. After that, I kept noticing her in small places. A grocery store aisle, a bookstore where she stood flipping through a paperback, reading the first page like she was testing the water. She always greeted me with the same amused warmth, like she wasn't surprised to see me but secretly glad I was there. At the cafe 2 blocks from campus, she remembered my order. "You're the one who gets black coffee, 2 sugars on the side," she said, sliding the cup across the counter one afternoon. "You work here now?" I asked, confused. "No, just helping out a friend." "But you do, don't you?" I nodded a little too quickly. She'd been paying attention. That night, I sat at my desk with my phone in hand, screen glowing against the dark. I typed out a text to her. Nothing strange, just, "Nice running into you today." Then I deleted it, wrote it again, deleted it again. Finally, I set the phone face down and told myself it was better left unsent. Still, the silence in the room felt heavier than usual. 2 weeks later, Daniel invited me over for dinner. His mom answered the door. Her hair was down this time, falling across her shoulders. "Hey," I said, my voice catching a little. "Hey yourself," she replied, stepping aside so I could enter. She brushed past me to close the door, her arm grazing mine. Maybe it was an accident. Maybe not. Either way, I felt the warmth of her skin long after she'd moved away. During dinner, I barely spoke. Daniel filled the silence, telling stories, laughing at his own jokes. But every so often, I'd glance at her across the table. She'd be reaching for the salt, or listening to her son with a smile, or cutting her food with a slow, careful rhythm. When she noticed me watching, she didn't frown or look away. She just tilted her head slightly, as if to ask what I thought I was doing. I didn't have an answer. When I left that night, she followed me to the door. "Thanks for coming," she said, her voice low. I nodded. "Good food." She smiled, then leaned closer. Not enough for Daniel to notice from the kitchen, but enough for me to hear her whisper. "If you walk out that door," she said, "you'll regret it." My hand froze on the knob, and just like that, the ordinary life I thought I had tilted into something I couldn't name. I didn't go back inside that night. I walked home with her words echoing in my chest, unsure if she'd meant them as a warning, a dare, or something else entirely. But they stayed with me. The next time I saw her, it wasn't planned. Daniel had asked me to help him move some boxes from the garage. But when I showed up, he wasn't there. His mom was. "Daniel got caught up at work," she explained, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Said you might still come by." I nodded, shifting awkwardly in the doorway. "Do you still need help?" Her smile was small, almost careful. "If you don't mind." We carried dusty boxes together, the kind filled with old photo albums and holiday decorations. She opened one at the kitchen table, flipping through pictures of birthdays and vacations. Daniel was always the loud one, she said, tapping a photo of him with frosting smeared across his face. His father, she stopped, closing the album halfway. Well, his father wasn't around much, so it was just the two of us most days. I didn't know what to say. She didn't sound sad exactly, just resigned. Like it was a story she'd told herself too many times already. You did a good job, I offered quietly. She glanced up, her eyes softer than I expected. You don't have to say that. I know, I said, and I meant it. After the boxes were stacked neatly again, she boiled water for tea. The kitchen felt too quiet, except for the kettle's slow hiss. I sat at the counter, watching the way her hands moved, steady, practiced, and thought about how easily I could reach across the space between us. But I didn't. When she slid the mug toward me, her fingers brushed mine. Neither of us pulled away right away. Just a second too long, but it was enough to quicken my pulse. This is strange, isn't it? I said finally. Her expression didn't change, but her shoulders shifted slightly, like she'd been holding her breath. It is. You're my son's friend. You're 20. 22, I corrected. She gave a half smile, but it didn't erase the crease between her brows. Still, I wanted to say something back, that I wasn't a kid, that I knew what I was feeling, but the words tangled in my throat. So instead, I stared at the steam curling from my cup, pretending it held the answers I couldn't give her. When I finally stood to leave, she walked me to the door. This time, there was no whisper, no warning, just the smallest gesture. Her hand reaching up, brushing a speck of dust from my shoulder. It should have been nothing, a simple, motherly thing, but the way her fingers lingered, light against the fabric, sent a ripple through me I couldn't name. I don't know why that moment stayed with me. Maybe because it felt like someone finally saw me. For a while, nothing changed. At least, not on the surface. I'd stop by Daniel's house sometimes, and she'd be there, always polite, always careful. But our eyes lingered too long when we spoke. Our words carried more weight than they should. One evening, Daniel had asked me to wait in the living room while he grabbed his jacket. His mom came in with a plate of cut fruit, setting it on the table like a casual host. You don't have to do that, I said. She gave a small shrug. Old habits. I like making sure people are taken care of. The silence after that stretched out. She sat across from me, but her gaze drifted toward the floor, then to me again, as if she was about to say something but didn't. I picked up a piece of apple, more for something to do with my hands. My fingers tapped against the plate. Hers were folded loosely in her lap, but I noticed how her thumb rubbed over her own knuckle, a nervous tick. The moment broke when Daniel came barreling down the stairs, keys jangling. Ready? He asked. I nodded, standing too quickly, bumping the table edge. She caught my arm lightly before I steadied myself. Just a touch, but it lingered like a shadow the rest of the night. Later that week, I passed her in the grocery store. She was reaching for something on a high shelf. I didn't think, just stepped in and grabbed it for her. Thank you, she said softly. And then, after a pause, you always seem to show up when I need a hand. Her voice carried something underneath, not flirtation exactly, but something near it. I wanted to ask if she meant that, if she noticed me the way I noticed her. But then a familiar voice broke through. Hey man, Daniel. He appeared at the end of the aisle holding a basket, smiling at me. My heart stuttered. She stepped back, putting space between us so smoothly it might have been rehearsed. By the time Daniel reached us, her expression was perfectly neutral. That night, I lay awake replaying it. The way she'd looked up at me in the store. The way she'd pulled back the instant her son arrived. What was I to her? A kid with a crush? A mistake she refused to name? The answer almost came one quiet evening, when Daniel had left for a late shift and I stopped by to drop off the book I'd borrowed. She opened the door, barefoot, sweater hanging loose on her shoulders. Come in, she said, her voice softer than usual. I followed her into the kitchen. She poured us both tea without asking, setting the mugs down. For a while we didn't speak, Just the sound of the clock ticking on the wall, the faint hum of the refrigerator. Then she looked at me, not quick, not cautious, just held me there with her eyes. I leaned in without thinking, close enough to see the fine lines around her mouth, close enough to catch the warmth of her breath. She didn't move away, but she didn't close the distance either. Her hand tightened around the mug, the ceramic creaking faintly. "Maybe we shouldn't," she whispered, but her eyes told a different story. It happened on a walk of all things. Daniel had left early from our hangout, and I lingered behind. His mom offered to walk me out. The neighborhood was still damp from last night's rain, the air smelling of wet leaves. We didn't talk much at first, just the sound of our shoes against the pavement. Then, out of nowhere, she said, "You spend a lot of time here. More than with your own family, I'd guess." It wasn't an accusation, not exactly, but something in her voice carried weight. "I like being here," I said, eyes fixed on the cracked sidewalk. She stopped walking. I turned, and she was watching me with that same unreadable expression. "You don't know what you're saying." "I do," I said too quickly. My throat tightened. "I notice things. The way you—" I cut myself off, shook my head. "Forget it." "No," her voice was low. "Say it." I swallowed hard. "The way you make space for me. Like I belong here. Like I matter." Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Her eyes flicked to the ground, then back to me. For a long moment, neither of us moved. She finally whispered, "Do you know how dangerous that is? For both of us." "Yeah," I said, my hands curled into fists inside my pockets. "But I can't stop thinking about it." Her breath caught, a small, almost invisible sound, and then she exhaled slowly, as if she'd been holding something in for years. We stood under the dim glow of a streetlight, close enough for shadows to overlap. The silence between us wasn't empty. It was heavy, trembling with things unsaid. Her fingers twitched, like she might reach for me. Instead, she wrapped her arms around herself, a fragile armor. I almost stepped closer. Almost. But then she looked at me, eyes full of questions she couldn't voice. And I realized the only thing holding us there, in that charged stillness, was the question neither of us dared to finish. What happens if we do? The week after that walk, everything changed. Not in an obvious way. She didn't slam the door in my face or tell me to stay away. She just pulled back. When I came by, she was suddenly busy. Laundry to finish, phone calls to return, errands to run. Her voice stayed warm, polite, but her eyes no longer held me the way they had under that streetlight. At first, I thought I'd imagined it. Maybe I'd said too much. Maybe I'd leaned too close. But then Daniel mentioned, almost casually, "My mom's been weird lately, distant, even with me." That stung more than I wanted to admit. I tried to keep things normal. Stopped by with a borrowed book. Asked if she needed help moving groceries. She accepted, thanked me, but the conversation stayed short. No long silences filled with questions. No glances that lingered too long. Then one night, while stacking dishes in the kitchen, she said it. Not looking at me, not even turning her head. "My ex called." I froze. She kept drying the plate in her hands. "He wants to reconnect. For Daniel's sake, mostly. He thinks we should talk. About what went wrong." There it was. The missing piece. I nodded slowly, though she still wasn't looking at me. "Do you want that?" Her hand tightened on the plate. "I don't know what I want." After that, she didn't walk me to the door anymore. She didn't make tea unless Daniel was around. She didn't ask me to stay. And I didn't push. I told myself it was better this way, that maybe the silence would fade and things would return to what they'd been before. But every night, I found myself staring at my phone, typing out a message I never sent. "I don't care about him. Care about you." Then deleting it, over and over. One evening, Daniel invited a few friends over. We sat in the living room playing cards, laughing too loud. She passed through, offering snacks, her face calm but unreadable. When our eyes met, I thought I saw something there. A flicker, a hesitation. But then she turned away before I could be sure. That night, walking home, I passed by her window. The light was still on in the kitchen. She sat at the table alone, shoulders bent, hands clasped as if she were holding something fragile. I almost knocked. Almost. Instead, I stood there for a minute too long, then shoved my hands into my pockets and kept walking. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused, like life forgot to finish the sentence. It was late when it finally happened. Daniel had gone out with friends, leaving me alone at their house to pick up a jacket I'd left behind. I almost grabbed it and left, but the light in the kitchen was on. She was there, rinsing a cup at the sink. No music, no TV, just the slow drip of water. "Didn't expect you," she said, not turning around. "I didn't expect me either," I replied. She dried the cup carefully, placed it upside down on the counter. Then she leaned against the sink, arms folded, staring at the floor. For a while, neither of us spoke. The silence felt like standing at the edge of something steep. Finally, I said it. "I don't know how to do this anymore. Pretend I don't notice you. Pretend I don't—" I stopped, the words tangling, my throat tight. She lifted her head. Her eyes found mine, steady but tired. "You shouldn't say that." "But it's true," I whispered. "And you know it." Her hands tightened around her arms. She shook her head slowly, as if arguing with herself. "You're too young." Her voice caught. "I'm supposed to know better." "Then why does it feel like you see me?" I said. "More than anyone else." Her breath stilled. She looked away, out the window at the empty street, as though searching for an answer in the dark. When she turned back, her expression was raw. Not soft, not tender, stripped bare. "You don't understand what it costs," she said quietly. "If we let this happen, what it takes away." "I know what it gives," I said, my voice trembling. We stood there, the words settling like dust in the kitchen light. Her shoulders dropped. Slowly, she reached out, fingertips brushing my sleeve. A tiny, tentative contact, as if testing whether the world would collapse at the touch. Didn't. Her hand stayed there. My breath caught, but I didn't move closer. I just let her hand rest against me, warm and uncertain. We looked at each other for what felt like a long time. Nothing else. No kiss. No promises. Just the truth of what we'd both been carrying finally out in the open. She exhaled, almost a laugh, almost a sigh. "Okay," she said softly. And that was it. Not an answer. Not a future. Just, okay. Time did what it always does. Weeks folded into months, the sharp edge of everything softening. Nothing dramatic happened. No big confrontation. No sudden collapse. Just the quiet reordering of lives. I still came by, though less at first. Helping Daniel move things, sharing a meal, running into her at the grocery store. The charged silences began to loosen, replaced with something steadier, something easier to carry. She didn't pull away anymore. If anything, she let me stay in small ways. A cup of tea left for me on the counter without being asked. My jacket hung neatly on the same hook by the door, as though it had a permanent place there. One Saturday morning, we ended up on the bench outside the laundromat, the same one where it all started. She had her thermos, I had my black coffee. The air was cool, the street half empty. We didn't need to fill the space with words. She tapped her thermos lightly against my cup, a small clink, and gave me a look that carried more than any sentence could. "You still take 2 sugars," she said. "And you still carry that thing everywhere," I answered, nodding at her thermos. She smiled. Not the guarded kind, not the careful one. Just a smile. I realized then that it wasn't about crossing some invisible line, or naming what this was. It was about being seen in the ordinary moments. A folded napkin, a brushed sleeve, a pause that lasted just long enough. Daniel still didn't know. Not everything, anyway. Maybe he suspected. Maybe he didn't. But life went on, as it always does, with its quiet rhythms. She worked, I studied, he laughed too loud at his own jokes. And in the spaces between, we found something steady. Not perfect, not easy, but real. That night, as I left her house, she followed me to the door like she always did. The same way she had months ago, only different now. Her hand brushed mine as I reached for the knob. She didn't whisper warnings this time. Instead, she just looked at me, her eyes soft. "Okay?" she asked, the same word she'd given me that night in the kitchen. "Okay," I said, and I meant it. Sometimes it's not the big declarations that stay with you. It's the quiet ones. The things only you and one other person understand. Like how black coffee tastes better at 8:47 a.m. with 2 sugars. Or how a thermos carried everywhere becomes a kind of promise. I think that's what love looks like. Not fireworks, not lightning. Just a slow, steady warmth that finally feels like home. Did this story stay with you? What kind of quiet, real love stories do you want to hear next?